This week's episode of I Was a Teenage Film Snob is not brought to you by Ecto Cooler. Welcome to I Was a Teenage Film Snob. I'm James Chalmers, your friendly neighborhood film snob, and believe it or not, it is episode 93 of this podcast, which is insane to me. Episode 100, not too far away at all, 7 weeks to go, and we will be there. Never in my life did I think we'd get there. Not because I doubted any of my guests, but more because, I don't know, 100 just seemed so far away, yet here we are, we're on the cusp, as it were. But before we get to episode 100, we got some work to do. We got to finish up our 2000s films. We're not doing that today. I have a new topic on the way, which is going to be very fun. We're not starting that today either. And I have some more new guests coming up as well. I've spoken to a few other friends who've never been on the show, who've shown some interest, so we're going to try and get them organized. And I'm still working behind the scenes trying to get some cool special guests as well. I'm still working with an actor. She's been busy shooting a movie. I've got a director who's busy at conventions and doing all sorts of stuff, but I'm still working with her as well. And then I took a real big swing at someone who's way out of my league and way out of this podcast league. But you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So we'll see how we go. This is all a very long introduction and kind of elongated way of me saying that I don't have a guest tonight, which is totally fine. I was thinking about trying to get some people together, try and get something organized, but it's been crazy at work the last few weeks. I've been pretty run down and tired. I was actually sick the other day as well, so I did want to obviously put out some content for you all, so you're not missing a week. I did actually contemplate skipping a week, but we're on the road to 100. Let's keep going. So what I thought I'd do instead is do another solo show. It's been a minute since I've done one of those, and just talk about a couple of new movies I've seen. And by couple, I literally mean two. So this won't be a particularly long episode. I'd be shocked if it exceeded the half-hour mark, although I can talk quite a lot even when I'm by myself. See previous solo episodes to prove it, I guess. I don't know. I'm very tired. You can probably hear it in my voice. So I went to the movies twice in the last couple of weeks, two pretty big films, or one very big film, I would say, one long-awaited film, and another one that has kind of been a bit of a sleeper hit, bit of a surprise. A lot of people didn't really know about this flick, and it's been getting a lot of popularity. So the first movie I'm going to talk about and quasi-review is going to be Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire, and then I'm going to talk about Late Night with the Devil, which I'm very excited to talk about both of these. And interestingly, normally when I talk about movies on solo shows, they're movies that I went to by myself. I go to the cinema by myself most of the time, not because I don't have any friends, but because I just like to go and do things by myself, you know? And as you all know, listening to this show, all 93 episodes now, or 92 when the start of this one, I got a kid, you know? So I will often go to the movies once my daughter's asleep, and, you know, Tina will stay at home and look after her because, when I say look after her, just, you know, make sure she stays in the house the entire night, and I'll go off and go see a movie. So, but with these ones, I had a guest both times. I went and saw Ghostbusters with Tina, and I went and saw Late Night with the Devil with Josh. So two, obviously very close friends. Tina, very close friend, being my wife, and also regulars on the show as well. So let's dive into the Frozen Empire first. Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire. This is a flick I've been really looking forward to for a long time. I loved Ghostbusters Afterlife. I thought it was a really refreshing take on the franchise. It feels weird referring to Ghostbusters as a franchise. I know they've had some animated series back in the 90s and 80s and stuff like that. I didn't really watch those. For me, it's always been just those first two films. And then obviously there's the 2016 remake, which is what it is. You know, I don't think it's a terrible film. I think my initial review of the film was it just didn't have much of a lasting impact on me. Certainly not terrible, and I'm sure there's a generation of people who love that film, but it just never really did anything for me personally. I wasn't one of those people who was like, the Ghostbusters have to be men. I was never that guy, but it just didn't. I felt like the writing of that film kind of underserved the performers in it. And I don't know who wrote it. I think Paul Feig might have been involved. And again, he's a wonderful writer, wonderful director. For whatever reason, there's just a disconnect. I think the biggest flaw with that 2016 film is that you got a fantastic writer and director, a fantastic cast. who are all used to doing R-rated comedy, and you're trying to sell ostensibly a children's film. Ghostbusters isn't a children's film, but they really toned it down in a way that these performers, they have done, like a lot of them are SNL alumni and stuff like that, so they have worked clean, but they're better when they've got no restrictions. And I think that was the fatal flaw of that film. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. So Frozen Empire was really looking forward to, because I've always been a fan of the franchise, as I mentioned, going back to the 1984 Ghostbusters. Um, I loved how they kind of reintroduced in Afterlife, that it was completely different. They left the city, they left the original team behind, but there were lovely little references to them. And then, of course, spoiler alert for a 4 or 5 year old movie. I can't remember how old this one was now. The Ghostbusters came back at the end. Even spoiler alert, Egon, through, obviously through CGI and stuff like that. But I really loved that. I thought that was great. It felt like a great send off to the original cast and a great way to introduce this new cast. So with Frozen Empire coming up, it was one of my most hotly anticipated films of the year. We obviously have returning from the previous film, McKenna Grace, who, by the way, like, if people aren't paying attention to McKenna Grace, like, this girl is going to be huge. Every performance she puts in is fantastic. I first saw her in I, Tonya about 7 years ago, and she would have been like 10 years old in that flick, and amazing, incredible. Like, she plays young Tonya Harding, she plays young Margot Robbie essentially, and I couldn't believe how fantastic she was. I had to take a quick pause there. Apologies. Even when I'm not recording with guests, I do get called away. Um, so yeah, McKenna Grace, fantastic. So she's returning from the previous film. Finn Wolfhard returns from the previous film. Obviously, we know him best from Stranger Things. He was also in It, the remake of that one. Paul Rudd and Carrie Coon also reprised in their roles. On top of that, we also have the original Ghostbusters. Again, I'm going to go into some light spoiler territory. I'm going to try and keep it pretty spoiler free where possible, although we'll see where it goes. So Dan Aykroyd has a huge role in the film. Bill Murray returns, and he's in it quite a bit, and Ernie Hudson as well returns to the flick. A couple of actors from the original films also in there. If I'm being perfectly honest, I don't remember their names, but that's totally fine. And then on top of that, we have Kamal Nanjiani coming in playing a role. We've got Patton Oswalt in there. You've got, personally, one of my favorite performers in the entire film is my favorite comedian of all time. So James Acaster, who's a UK stand-up, he kind of plays like an Egon Spengler type character. And there's probably a bunch of others that I'm not remembering right now, and I'm sure I'll remember them as the time goes on. You can probably tell just from me listing the cast there, it sounds quite crowded. And that is what I would say is the biggest flaw with this film. I want to say right off the bat, I love this movie. I thought it was really fun. It really captured the spirit, no pun intended, of the previous film. It was a great continuation, but there was a lot going on. The flick is less than 2 hours long, which I really liked. I liked they kept it short. I'm not in that same camp where everyone's like, there's too many long movies. I don't care. Like, if it's a good movie and you're using your time well, make it as long as you need to. That's totally fine. But I did appreciate that for like a, kind of action blockbuster tentpole film, they did keep it under 2 hours. I thought that was smart. The only problem is they had so many characters in there that I think they either needed more runtime to flesh things out a bit more, or cut a couple of characters. That's just me feeling, my personal feelings. Although, from what I understand, a few people have felt the same way. It's a bit crowded with characters. But beyond that, the flick's totally enjoyable. It does take a little while to build up to the whole Frozen Empire of it all. Like, we get little taste at the start of the film, and then there's a lot of kind of, how do I describe it? I guess a Ghostbuster drama. So I'll talk about this. This is kind of the only mild spoiler, but it's not really a spoiler. Basically, our new Ghostbusters from the previous film have moved into the firehouse, the original firehouse from the original movie, and they're kind of now the official New York Ghostbusters. They do interact with Dan Aykroyd from time to time. He's kind of like he's in the same role he had in the previous film, where he's an ex-Ghostbuster. He runs like a mystical shop with mystical artifacts and stuff like that. But at the very beginning of the film, they're chasing down this dragon ghost thing, which is really cool. I really like the ghost design in this film as well. And they end up doing a bunch of property damage to the city of New York. And the mayor calls them on, and is like, "Hey, what are you doing? Like, we appreciate you stopping the ghost, but who's going to pay for all this?" It's kind of the same way how damage control was introduced in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And yes, I know that they exist in the comics first for those who are paying attention and playing at home, but kind of a similar thing where they're kind of being pulled up on it. They're like, look, you got to put a lid on it. You got to keep the damage down, otherwise we're going to get rid of you. And that's when we get our first kind of, I guess, like challenge of the film where McKenna Grace's character, I'm totally blanking on character names. As I mentioned, I'm very tired. But because she's 15 years old, she's not legally allowed to work in the city of New York. So the mayor's like, you got to pull her off the roster. And so begins this kind of divide between her and the rest of her family. Like obviously Paul Rudd was her teacher in the previous film, and now he's kind of like the pseudo stepfather character. So he's a Ghostbuster, her mum's a Ghostbuster, and her brother's a Ghostbuster, but she's been pulled from the roster, and there's kind of this divide. And if you remember the previous film, there was already a bit of a divide because she's just far more intelligent than anyone else around. Like she's just a whiz kid. She's just running rings around people. So beyond the gap they already had, they've introduced the other kind of challenge for them. And I thought she did a really wonderful job. She really carried the film. It's definitely her movie. And she's going opposite titans, of Hollywood, titans of cinema. She's going, holding her own against Paul Rudd. She's holding her own against Dan Aykroyd. She's holding her own against Kumail Nanjiani. Like she's excellent in the film. Finn Wolfhard is great for what he does, but one of my biggest disappointments with this film, like, he was such a pivotal character in the previous film, like he's the older brother, like he's kind of excited about kind of exploring the town and everything. In Frozen Empire, I think the guy has like 5 lines. Like he's in most of the scenes, but he doesn't have anything to do. And I think it's ultimately, and this is going to maybe shock some people and maybe, I don't know, turn up their noses at me, but I think the biggest problem with this movie is that Dan Aykroyd has way too much screen time. And that's coming from a guy who's a Dan Aykroyd fan. Like I love Dan Aykroyd. Obviously, I've talked about the Blues Brothers a lot. I've talked about Ghostbusters, and I loved him on SNL and all that sort of stuff. But I don't really know why he's there in this movie. Like I understand that he's kind of he's a plot device. Like he's there to kind of introduce them to the history of this kind of artifact they find that unleashes all the ghosts. Mild spoilers again. But ultimately, he's not even the guy who really gives them the information. He just is the guy that gets them to the guy. But he's in so many scenes, and I actually found him really distracting because every time it was one of his scenes, even though McKenna Grace was in those scenes, I was like, can we cut back to the other characters? I don't need Dan Aykroyd to be a main character in this film. Um, Shots fired, I guess. Hot take, maybe. But I felt like the amount of screen time that he and the other Ghostbusters got in the previous film was more than enough. Like it was a good dose. It felt like a great organic send off while we introduced the new roster, and they could have, kept them in for a cameo in this film as well. It was great seeing Annie Potts. I can't remember her being in the previous film, but Tina did tell me she was. I just don't remember. But it was great seeing her pick up a proton pack and stuff as well. Because in the old films, obviously, she was the secretary. She had nothing to do with busting ghosts. Busting ghosts, as James Acaster would say. But yeah, like again, Dan Aykroyd, he's great in it, but I just found him really distracting, especially because we've got Kumail Nanjiani, who's wonderful. Like I love Kumail Nanjiani, but he's got this whole kind of like secret history and like this family lineage and the like defenders of the world and stuff like that. And I don't want to go into too much more with that, because I'm going to get into spoiler territory. But again, I was like, well, not only do we introduce Kumail, we introduce his whole like kind of lineage and like kind of his ancestors, and it just felt like two different films put together. Finn Wolfhard hardly in the flick. Great when he's in it. He's got some really good one-liners. Like he's got some great comic relief. I don't need him for that because you've got Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd is great comic relief. Again, not saying that Finn Wolfhard can't do it, but I would say, for if I'm arguing for it, I would say that Finn Wolfhard's character is more important than Paul Rudd's character. Even like he was the believer in the previous film, the one who kind of believed them and kind of supported them when they were kind of investigating. I don't need Paul Rudd to like. I can have Paul Rudd keep doing that and have Finn Wolfhard take more of a front seat again. That's what I would have liked. I can't remember who it is. I want to say Emily Allen Lind. It's one of the Allen Lind sisters. Plays a ghost who's like friends, or who kind of befriends McKenna Grace. She's wonderful. I really like the visual effect design around her as well. I liked her whole storyline. But again, that was a lot of kind of like, we're going to stop the narrative now. We're going to step away so McKenna Grace and this ghost can talk and kind of be friends because she's got no one else to talk to. And it was just the pacing between the amount of characters and the pacing was just a bit off. What else can I say about the flick for you? Let's talk about James Acaster, because when I found out he was cast, and I don't know whether it was kind of public knowledge for a long time and I just didn't pick up on it, but I'm a big fan of the Off Menu podcast. I'm a big fan of his stand-up. I love his appearance in Taskmaster. For me, and this is not an overstatement at all, my true feeling is that James Acaster is the funniest stand-up comedian in the world. I don't think anyone does it better than him, and that's not to say that, what about the people that came before him? Of course, George Carlin and David Cross and all that are fantastic. But for me, for my sense of humor, I think that point for point, James Acaster makes me laugh harder than any other comedian. Close second would be John Mulaney. But I had no idea he was in this film until late in the game. When they had Paul Rudd on the podcast and they kind of talked about working on a movie together, I didn't even piece together that it was Ghostbusters. Now, I read some reviews leading up to the film and then after I've seen the film as well, and a lot of people said that James Acaster is the weakest part of the film. And I've got to be honest, I don't understand that. Now, I know he's not an actor, and I'm not making excuses for him. You signed on to act in the film, you've got to act. But even though he's not an actor, I think he did a great job. If you've ever seen his stand-up specials, particularly the Netflix ones, a lot of that is not. It's not just stand-up. He's playing characters. It's very formulaic. It's very not formulaic, formulated. That's what I'm trying to say. It's very much a scripted story beyond just a stand-up routine. I think he's really, really funny. I think he's really good. And he was actually the highlight in the film for me, other than McKenna Grace, who, as I've said time and time again, is brilliant, perfect. I think he kind of fit into the Spengler role, or kind of the pseudo Spengler role quite well. I thought he was really funny, but I thought he also managed to bring some dramatic chops to it as well, which I wasn't expecting. And something happens towards the end of the film. I'm not going to say anything other than that, but I thought that I can't even say that. Anything I'm going to say is going to spoil it. But I thought something was going to happen, and it didn't happen the way I thought it was going to happen, but I was actually quite relieved. I do hope he gets to continue being in these movies. I think he's really great. It's very weird for me seeing this guy who was relatively unknown only 6 or 7 years ago to suddenly be in one of the biggest releases of the year. If not the biggest release of the year. Okay, Dune probably the biggest release of the year. Deadpool probably after that, and then I think Ghostbusters. I'm trying to think if there's anything else huge coming out. There probably is something I'm not thinking about, but that's huge. So he was really good. I really enjoyed his performance. I thought, as I said, very, very funny. Whole cast really great. I don't know if I got much more to say about Ghostbusters. Oh, let's talk about the villain. That's one of the things I was saying. I felt like I mentioned before, the Frozen Empire of it all came quite late. I don't think it really shows up until definitely after the hour mark. It takes more than half the film for kind of the Frozen Empire of it all to kind of begin, and it really is the third act. They're kind of building, and then late in the game, the Frozen Empire of it all kind of hits. There's, and then if you've seen the trailer, that the shots of the beach where the icicles come out, which to me is so cool. Again, no pun intended. I think it's such a visually interesting idea. I've never seen anything like that in a movie before, where you're looking at a summer's day, it's a beach, and then suddenly these razor sharp icicles are coming up, narrowly missing human beings in the face. I think that's fantastic. So I really like that. I would have liked more. I would have liked, personally, I think if I had my way, I would have had it be a Frozen Empire. I keep saying that as if it means anything. I would have had the freeze come way earlier in the movie. I'm saying by the end of the first act, the end of the first hour, or first half hour even, get it in nice and early, because then you can have the Ghostbusters separated and exploring New York, and it's New York is all they've known, all they know, but now suddenly New York is unpredictable and frozen. There's monsters and ghosts, and you can save people. So I don't know. I would have done. That's the way I would have done it. I would have done it the way they did Day After Tomorrow. That's what I would have done. But anyway, that's totally fine. Spoilers: Flick has a relatively happy ending, I would say. But yeah, that's Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Tina and I talked about it after. We both really enjoyed it. She had similar, I think, kind of critiques that I did. Maybe not as harsh as me, which is funny because I tend to not be too harsh a critic, I think. But yeah, and again, I haven't gone into all the characters, but all I have to say is that if one of the leads from your last movie is hardly getting a line in the sequel, there's some story issues there, but not enough to not enjoy it. Like, I'm picking it apart, but I really did love it. I thought it was fantastic. It definitely delivered on most expectations for me. I hope they keep this going. It sounds like they will, because the movie does open with like a Ghostbusters Incorporated logo. So they're obviously, pardon me, franchising now. They're going to keep going with it. But I would say moving forward, and it's going to be controversial, ditch the OGs. Get Dan Aykroyd out of there. Get Bill Murray out of there. Get Ernie Hudson out of there. Have them cameo for sure, absolutely. Or even just have them appear like, you know, as a solo venture. Like, maybe this next movie only Bill Murray shows up, that sort of thing. I don't know. Like, it seems like they're going to keep shoehorning them in, which is fine. I'm not going to hate it. I just feel like they need to find their balance better. I think the first film is a very balanced film. It's very well made. And I had no critiques of the first film. I loved it from start to finish. I thought it was perfect. This one here, just a couple of little ones. But ultimately, very enjoyable film. PG, wasn't expecting that. I thought it was going to be an M film. For American listeners, that's like a PG-13. But it's a pretty hard PG. Like, there's some dismemberment, which I wasn't expecting in a PG film, and there are some scary moments as well. I would also say that the villain, not as scary as I would have liked. Like, there's a lot of silhouettes in the trailers. You're like, oh my god, he's gonna be so cool. And again, it's a PG. They're going for a younger audience, so I get why. But they could have, I think, tweaked the design just a little bit. But again, that's a minor quibble. He wasn't awful looking. I just would have liked a little bit more menace for my Ghostbusters film. Like the original Ghostbusters films, how they had a really good balance of humor and scary. I would have liked more of that personally. But all in all, great flick, definitely worth checking out. But as I always say, don't listen to me, don't believe what I say, vote with your wallet. But give it a chance. It's yeah. For McKenna Grace and James A. Castor alone, just for those two performances. Alrighty. So I watched that one with Tina, and then the other night I went and saw Late Night with the Devil with my buddy Josh. Now, I'd seen the trailer for Ghostbusters, but as I've talked about on the show, I am trying to watch less and less trailers. I don't want things to be spoiled. And it really began with Batman v Superman, a film that I really like now. But the last trailer for that movie, I think everyone would agree, like in the lead up to that film, everyone was very excited for it. And then that trailer came out, and it's like, everyone was like, oh, Doomsday's in this film. Well, that would have been a nice surprise. And I go back and forth on it a little bit with the Marvel stuff. I feel like Civil War, it would have been a nice surprise to find out Spider-Man was in the film in theaters, but also the amount of casting, and because it's such a big deal, like we all knew Spider-Man was showing up. So, but I do try and watch less and less trailers, particularly with horror films. Obviously, if I'm going to the theater, I can't avoid them. But that's the best way to watch a trailer, anyways, is in the theater, not on your phone. But Late Night with the Devil, I hadn't seen any trailers. I hadn't read any spoilers. All I knew was that it was an American horror film made in Melbourne, which is where I'm from, or it was an Australian film, but portrayed as in set in America. So yeah, shot in the Dockland Studios, which I thought was very cool. The cast is relatively unknown and relatively Australian, but they're all doing accents, with the exception, I believe, of David Dismalchin, who plays the lead. And like the producer of the show, there's this guy, like this like frizzy head guy. I recognize the name immediately. He played like a amnesia patient in Home and Away like 15 years ago. Josh Kwong Tart, I think his name is, if I remember correctly. If I'm getting it wrong, I apologize. He was fantastic in the film, by the way. So the premise of Late Night with the Devil is it's a found footage film. Now, I've said on the podcast time and time again, I'm not huge on found footage. I didn't know it was found footage going in, but I thought it was delivered in such a spectacular way that I was immediately sucked in. And basically the premise is this. There's this late night host of this show called Night Owls. It's kind of like a Tonight Show type talk show where he interviews a bunch of guests. I can't remember the character's name now off the top of my head, but played by David Dismalchin. That name might not sound familiar because it is a little bit unusual, but his first appearance, David Dismalchin, was in The Dark Knight. That was his first film. He played the insane asylum inmate that Harvey Dent's interrogating. He went on to play He went on to go play Polka Dot Man in the Suicide Squad. Something happened with my sound. I apologize. He's been in a bunch of genre stuff. He loves genre. He's a big fan of horror and comic books and all stuff. And he's wonderful. And like I've heard interviews, and he seems like a really cool guy. So it was really nice to see him take the lead in something. And I'm sure he's had leading roles in smaller projects. And this is by no means a huge project; it's pretty small as well. But it was really great to see him play that. So he plays this kind of talk show host for a Tonight Show type show. And basically, it's Halloween night, and the premise of the film is. Um, on his very last appearance on his own show, this guy hosted his talk show on Halloween night, and a bunch of strange occurrences happened, and then the footage was lost, and no one knows what happened, but everyone disappeared, or people disappeared. And they're like, we found the footage, and you're going to see the entire show, including like interview segments and stuff in between what aired. So it's basically just the live footage from the talk show, which I was like, what a great premise. And I was learning this premise as I was watching. I'm like, this is cool. I like this. Um, and basically, so what happens is he's running this talk show, and you find out at the start of the film that like he was this kind of quasi successful talk show host, never quite as good as Johnny Carson, but always like kind of fighting him in the ratings a little bit. Um, and then his wife suddenly, got sick and then passed away, and so he disappeared. He didn't do the show for a while, and then a month later he comes back, and he's trying to get the show going and stuff like that again. And then there's like all these rumors that maybe he was part of a cult, and like not like a Midsummer cult or like a Sacrament type cult, more like a rich people Hollywood, like we'll sell us all for fame type cult, like one of the more like an Eyes Wide Shut type cult, I suppose. I should say at this point, spoilers for this film. This film is still in theaters. If you're in the States, it's on Shudder. For some reason, it's not on Shudder in Australia, but it is in theaters currently. So I probably will spoil a few things. I'll try not to. Um, but I will say this before I go any further: watch this flick. If you like horror movies, watch this flick. If you like found footage, watch this flick. If you like possession films, exorcism films, watch this flick. I think it's one of the strongest films we've seen in 2024 so far. I think it's perfectly balanced. I think it balances the humor, it balances the horror, and it never goes too far. One thing I will say watching this film is that from once the show began within the movie, after the first kind of 8 to 10 minutes, I was uneasy the entire movie because I knew something was going to happen, like the premise of the film. I hadn't seen any trailers, obviously, but I knew something was going to happen, and I didn't know how soon into it was going to happen. What tends to happen with most horror films is that like the weird stuff happens pretty straight ahead, and then like maybe from the 30 to 40 minute mark onwards, it is just pure terror. Which is fine. I don't mind that. I don't like being scared, even though I do love horror films. Um, but this film really managed to kind of like rein it in and keep it on the straight and narrow. Like it did what it needed to do very effectively, but it never was overkill. Um, so it opens. It's Halloween night. He shows up. He's got a bunch of guests on. He's got a psychic, a guy who can read minds, and like a medium, connect to the dead, like a John Edwards type character. He's got a skeptic, so a magician, who's actually based on the Amazing Randy. If you don't know the Amazing Randy, he was this magician in North America. I believe he passed away in the last couple of years. He was big friends with Penn and Teller, but he was also a huge skeptic, and he was go around saying like, "I'm going to offer you $100,000 if you can prove evidence of like the occult and stuff like that." And that's what this character does. He's extremely unlikable in the movie, but that's the point. I was talking to Josh about it after the film. I was like, man, like I hated that guy, which is good because I was supposed to, but man, like he was just so unbearable. Um, and then the last guest on the show is a woman who's a doctor, and she studied like kind of psychic science. So she's kind of like an exorcist, or she can kind of communicate with spirits. And she's written this book about a girl who escaped a satanic cult, and they believe there's a demon living within her, and she can kind of communicate with her from time to time. So that's the setup, and then the show begins. So like the Smartron's like interviewing this psychic guy, and each segment has a little bit of weird stuff. It's a little bit uneasy, a little bit on edge, but never gets truly frightening. It does a really great job. If you remember in Fight Club, I'm sure there are other films that have done it, and maybe even better than Fight Club. But I think Fight Club's a great example where Brad Pitt's role Tyler Durden, he works as a projectionist at a porno theater, and what he'll do is he'll take like a single frame of porn and like snip it into like other films. So when people are watching like a cartoon, then suddenly they get like genitalia on the screen. And if you watch Fight Club closely, that happens throughout the film as well. Like they set it up that he does it to his audience, but he's also doing it to us, the audience. Anyway, I guess what I'm saying is that this film also has like kind of hidden images throughout the film. There's like single frames of like faces and stuff, and like you'll see like the camera glitch, and then you'll see like kind of apparitions and disappear. So really well done, really unsettling. Um, the kind of medium psychic medium guy, the guy who can like speak to the dead, that whole segment starts off kind of like funny and silly, and like no one really kind of believes it, and then he has like a connection with a couple of women in the audience, and it feels like it could be cold reading. For those who know what cold reading is, the South Park actually did a really great episode on it. Like they actually made fun of John Edwards, and like Stan became this medium. But cold reading is just like, you're like, oh, I'm getting like a j sound, a j, and then like you let the audience fill in the details for you, and they'll be like, oh, he works, he was fighting with someone about money, because like when someone dies or when people are unwell or like when families have crisis, it's always about money. So the idea is like cold reading is you just kind of throw out very basic common facts that a lot of people have in common, and the audience will kind of put themselves in the scenario, and then the person doing it seems like they're psychic. So it kind of feels like that for the longest time, but then when he's speaking with these women, like it becomes more and more apparent that maybe he does have a bit of a gift, and then he kind of has this moment where he's like under overwhelming pain, he's like receiving all these signals from beyond apparently, and no one kind of fesses up to it, but like he's shouting at this name. He's like, what does this name mean? Who does it? And then like, I won't spoil it beyond there, but like things do not go well pretty much from that point on for anyone in the film. um they do a live exorcism on live TV, like within the film, which is very interesting. um I liked how subtle it was. Most exorcism films, I guess, the most common one or most popular one being The Exorcist, that kind of really set the tone. And for most demon films, possession films, exorcism films, they haven't really strayed too far from the look and style of what The Exorcist did back in 1975, 75, 74, 19. I think it was 19. I can't remember now. I think it was not. It was last year. You know what? It doesn't matter. That film's about 50 years old. But anyway, no one's really changed it too much. Like they get the scars in their face, they get like the furrowed brow, they get the raspy voice. I heard a dog barking. I thought it was my dog, but it's not. Um, is this? It's way more subtle. Like she gets a kind of a light scratch. Her eyes do change color, like very subtly. But it's more within the performance. She kind of twitches and writhes and moves around. Um, and that was really creepy. I wasn't expecting it to be as creepy as it was. I'm glad they didn't push it beyond there. Like they could have easily made it, 10 times scarier. But I liked the tone of the film. I liked that they didn't try to just constantly scare you or like have you kind of wet in your pants. They just did enough to keep you, because the whole idea of this film from start to finish is like, is it real or is it a farce? Like that's kind of what the premise they're going for. That's why they got the skeptic in there, and he's always constantly like, kind of trying to disprove everyone. And so I think if they went too heavy on it, it would have lost its effect. But by playing it subtle and playing it down the line where it could be real, it might not be real, I think was very, very clever. Very funny and very clever. That's a James A. Custer joke as well. Um, the best part of the flick for me is hands down the ending. I'm not going to talk about it here, not yet. Maybe I'll talk about it in the future, but because it's only just come out, I don't want to spoil it. But I was talking to Josh about it afterwards, because as the ending was unfolding, I said, initially I thought this was happening. I was kind of explaining my theory to him. I said, but it feels like maybe it was this instead. And we are kind of talking about like a good 15, 20 minutes after the film. And neither of us could really decide what it was. We both kind of agreed it was probably, if we had to pick, probably the more obvious, simple answer. But what I liked about it was that it was very open to interpretation. There's all sorts of kind of like psychedelic imagery. And yeah, the way the film ends, basically there's kind of this climactic point where they're trying to prove whether the exorcism was real or not. And a number of things happen. It gets very visually disturbing. The most visually disturbing part of the film, to be honest, I would say. Um, and the way that it's done is so impactful that you're like, oh, well, maybe then everything was fake. And then that leads into the finale, like the closing scene of the film. And I was like, I don't know what was real and what's not real. Like, I don't, yeah, it was, I know I sound like an idiot trying to like explain it without explaining it, but that's just the flick it was. It was just really well done. There's some really great clues throughout the film, and generally I'm pretty bad at picking up clues. Like I was talking to someone the other day that I get surprised in movies all the time. I don't um, I don't pick up on the clues, even though I've seen thousands of movies. I'm just a sucker every single time, which is great, by the way. Like I'm not complaining. I love being a sucker because that means it's kind of this really organic experience for me, and it always feels like something new or different. I'm never like sitting there being like, I know what's going to happen. And if I stop to think about it, I probably would, but I just don't. I just kind of let myself get sucked in. This film, I picked up on the clues, forgot about them, and then at the end, I was like, "Oh my god! Like this came up in the film at the start. Like I can't believe I forgot about that clue." Um, but yeah, I feel like said a lot of things without saying anything, which some could argue is this whole podcast. But that's pretty much it. Those are the two films I went and saw. Both excellent, both really, really enjoyable. Um, Ghostbusters, as I said, like if you're a fan of the franchise, I feel like you are going to be satisfied. Um, I personally was, as I said, not quite as high up for me as Afterlife. If I had to rank the franchise currently, I would probably go number one OG, number two Afterlife, number three Frozen Empire, number four Part number two, and then number five the 2016 remake. But I think that like Afterlife and Ghostbusters 2, the original Ghostbusters 2, are pretty close. I think they could almost be an equal third. Late Night with the Devil, I've never seen anything like it. That's my review. I've never seen anything like it. I think it's a really well executed found footage film. Obviously, towards the end, again, I won't spoil it, but it kind of breaks the rules of found footage a little bit, but it didn't even bother me. Like, I didn't care. David Smalchin proves in this flick he can totally be a leading man. I really liked him. He was really charming, and like when he needed to be scared, he was believable. He had this great empathy. He also is a bit of a jerk. Like there's some underlying stuff. I won't go into too much there, but he kind of walked all of those lines very, very well, which I'm not surprised by at all. But I'd like to see him do, give him a leading role in something. Like let him. I mean, obviously he led this, but give him something bigger to do as well. Um, Pardon me. But that's going to do it. That's this week's episode of the show. Just a short one, as I mentioned. Just want to talk about a couple of really great films. Enjoyed them both. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed them as well. Next week, I should be back with a guest. If not, I am seeing Civil War on Monday. Well, I haven't decided yet. It would be Civil War or it would be Monkey Man. I'm going to see one of those two films. I haven't decided yet. So, worst case scenario, if I don't have a guest, I'll talk about more movies. But I reckon we'll have someone back in the chair pretty soon. So, thank you everyone for listening to this shorter episode. Thanks for putting up with me just talking by myself to myself in a room all alone. And take care of yourselves. I'll speak to you all soon. I've got more content coming. 100 is around the corner. But until then, as I say every week on the show, guys, I was a teenage film snob, but I'm trying to be better.